Did you know that an effective onboarding program can help decrease turnover, increase new hire productivity, and help your organization have a competitive advantage? Today, we will discuss the 4 key elements necessary to create an effective onboarding program. Welcome to Employers Corner Podcast, a casual conversation about how to navigate the daily challenges in the workplace. I'm Chelsea Jensen, HR consultant, and I'm here today with my colleague, Amber Cruz, also HR consultant. Amber works and consults with member organizations in many facets, including HR benefits administration, compensation administration, staffing, performance management, and workplace violence. She is also a trainer and presenter in the areas of total rewards, onboarding, and retaining and engaging. Thank you so much, Amber, for being here with us today to discuss this important topic.
Thanks for having me, Chelsea.
Absolutely. So I think to get us going and kind of build a good foundation for our listeners, I'd love to hear from you. Because I think we hear these words thrown around interchangeably. What is the difference between orientation and onboarding, and how can we think about that?
Yeah, great question to start off with. And honestly, I think, everybody does use those terms interchangeably. Even I use those terms interchangeably. So it does happen. But I think that there is a really important distinction between both of those terms. And so let's start off with orientation. So what really is orientation? And I like to think of orientation as being much more transactional. It's logistics. It's where's my office? It's where's the restroom? It's where do I put my food on the first day if we're actually in the office? It's very one directional. So it's employer to new employee. And it's also really just a one-time event, if you will. Then there's onboarding. And onboarding, I like to think of as much more relational and also very welcoming for the new individual. It's really helping to set them up for success, and it is an ongoing process. It's a process over time. So I think that hopefully that'll help between the distinction between the two.
Awesome. And how long, for people out there who are thinking about onboarding, how long does that process last? Or when does it start and when does it end?
Yeah, so there's no right answer here, I will say, but it is certainly a question that I get. So I think that you can make the argument that onboarding really does start even before the individual starts with the organization. So the new hire is brought on. It really kind of starts, to me, in that recruiting phase. How you're actually treating the individual really starts that onboarding process. And then once you bring the individual on, when does it really end? It really ends in our opinion, and again, there's no right or wrong here, but in our opinion, after the first thing that somebody has to do in their job. So, for example, if you take an accountant and maybe they are brought on in May, for example. So tax filing season typically ends April 15th. They're brought on in May. They're probably not going to file taxes for clients until the next April that comes around. And so their onboarding really doesn't end until that last major thing happens for them. So that's one of the ways that I like to think of when onboarding actually ends. So that can be different for many different organizations, depending on the position specifically.
Great. Thanks. I think that's helpful to get us going here. So I do also want to touch on as well some of, I think, the common misconceptions that are out there.
There are a lot out there.
There are a lot out there about onboarding. And I feel like onboarding is one of those tasks or those sort of like administrative items that we think about as especially HR professionals that just kind of falls by the wayside.
Yeah.
And I think some organizations also don't maybe value it as much as it should be valued. So one of the things we hear a lot from our members and probably some leadership at organizations is that onboarding is only an HR thing. So what would you say to that?
Yes. I hear that a lot, that onboarding is solely an HR function. It's an HR task. And if you think about it, it takes everybody within the organization to help set a new employee up for success. Like kind of the way that we say that it takes a village to be able to raise a child, right? It takes the entire organization to really be able to set an employee up for success. And so, yes, it's typically an HR initiative and it's usually housed in HR, but really what we see is that there has to be involvement from every single department within the organization to make this successful. And so we do, of course, want HR. We want the executive team. So we want the C-suite. We want management. Managers are going to be key when it comes to helping individuals onboard within an organization. We want peers to be involved. We want IT to be involved. You know, all the different departments within an organization really are going to help make this an experience for an individual in which they will want to stay. So yes, common misconception, it's an HR function. No, it takes everybody in an organization to help an employee feel successful. And just think about your own self, right? If you were someone that was starting a new organization, you wouldn't want to just talk to individuals in HR. You'd want to talk to everybody within the organization and get different perspectives and understand how different departments work together. And that's going to be important. So put yourself in that position too.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's great. And I'm not sure if I told you this, but within the next couple of weeks, I'm actually doing a training, kind of a custom training for one of our members. And they have actually crafted or put together, if you will, an onboarding committee to roll out their new onboarding program and get it together at their organization. And their onboarding committee consists of people across the organization. It's not just HR who's going to be involved in creating this successful program. It's going to be people from all over the organization, managers, like you were saying, HR, and various other departments. So I think that that's huge. They're halfway there. Sometimes that can be a battle for some of our members. As we know, they share with us, how do we get other people, on board with this initiative? And we can talk about that a little bit as well as we get into this. So I think that that's really great. And I will also share that when I first started at Employers Council, think of other people, and even, there's a lot of people who can be involved in it that can make an impact. And I'll share that when I first started my first day at Employers Council, I remember that I walked in the door on my first day, and even our receptionist, who was Janice at the time, she said, "You must be Chelsea. Welcome to Employers Council, your first day here." And I will never forget that.
No, not at all.
I mean, yes, she, of course, is our receptionist for our organization. And even to her, she made a positive impact on my day. And recognizing, yes, of course, organizations some are virtual now, some are half and half. We got all kinds of situations now, but that made an impact on me on my first day too, that she knew it was my first day.
Absolutely. Yeah. And little things like that are going to help go a long way. I can guarantee it, with helping an individual become committed to the organization and engaged with the organization. It's those little things. And we'll talk about some of those little things, I think, that can pop up that can really help in an onboarding situation.
Great. All right. Next misconception. It can be accomplished in a day or two.
Oh, gosh. No. So that's really orientation, right? So it's just a one-time event. There's certainly compliance aspects that we have to deal with, and we'll talk about those later. But that is one aspect of this whole process. But let's face it, learning about an organization and learning about your job and learning about your colleagues and how to interact with those individuals on a day-to-day basis, that takes time, right? This is not something that you can just throw together and say, complete this paperwork, read this binder full of information and be done. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of organizations do that, and I'd be interested in actually seeing what their retention rate is for specific individuals. I have a personal example. I started working for an organization prior to coming to Employers Council, and there was no orientation. Let alone onboarding. There wasn't even an orientation, right? I was told, here's your office in the back, and it was a closet, I will mind you, and I was let to just be myself and go do what I was supposed to do. I didn't stay with that organization very long. So we need to make sure that we are absolutely focusing on this long term versus just trying to get an individual in, have them understand some policies, and get them to do their job. It takes time to integrate an individual within an organization.
Great. All right, our next one. Here we go. It's kind of related. It's all about the paperwork.
Yep.
Orientation onboarding is all about the paperwork.
Yep. Nope. I mean, like I said, there's compliance. Absolutely. There's compliance aspects to orientation and onboarding, but it's not all about the paperwork. And again, to set somebody up for success, it's more relational, right? We can't learn everything that we need to from reading or filling out papers or signing policies. It's so much more than that. So yes, do we have to complete an I-9 and we do have to complete a W-4 and things like that, but it's not all about the paperwork. And I would encourage you, if you are looking at your onboarding program, to really look at the relational piece of it more than just the paperwork that's involved.
Yes, absolutely. And I think sometimes we call it, and our members call it the information dump, if you will.
Yes.
Paperwork.
It's overwhelming. It's crazy how much we think that people can retain in 1 or 2 days. It's just not possible. It's not.
No one's going to remember it and no one's going to read it. So
no. And then they're going to ask it questions, and it's that's time consuming in and of itself because they're not retaining the information. So yeah, no.
And then our last one here is it doesn't matter that much.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, no, I mean, we really have to think about, what is the process? What are we trying to do within an individual when we're bringing them into an organization? Again, we're trying to set them up for success. We want them to be a contributing individual within our organization. And if we don't do it right, they're not going to be impactful, if you will, in an organization. And so it's very important. And I think organizations don't oftentimes view it as a strategic initiative within an organization, and it very much should be that we need to make sure that we have a strategic plan when it comes to the onboarding process within an organization, and we truly need to tie it back to the goals of the organization. It is that important that it truly should really have its own strategic plan, like I said, and then therefore you can follow that process, make sure that you are setting employees up for success and that they do become great employees for you in the future.
Yes, and I actually do. So in 2019, the Gallup organization, they conducted a full onboarding survey with multiple organizations, employers. And here is some of the data from that. It's really interesting. If you're thinking that if you're out there thinking it still doesn't matter that much. So only 12% of employees strongly agree that their organization does a great job of onboarding new employees. So that means 88% don't think that employees don't think their organizations are doing a great job of onboarding.
Staggering. Yeah.
It is staggering. And that also, I think for those listening, it shows you that if you can have a good structured onboarding program, your organization is going to be able to be that differentiator, have a competitive advantage in that way.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to think about is it shows that the company is invested in that individual, right? And we know that investment in an individual in one's professional development, personal development, that is a key driver to engagement. And so we're setting the right tone for an individual up front and showing that we truly care about them as a person and their success in the beginning. And I think that's what's important. So to me, that's a staggering statistic.
Yes. Next up, a negative onboarding experience results in new hires being 2 times more likely to look for other opportunities.
Yeah.
And that can translate to dollars as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we know that there's a cost to turnover within an organization. And if you don't do it right in the beginning, then you're likely to have higher costs. Absolutely. I mean, I think, I always say this with interviewing, and I think it's appropriate here. If you fail to plan to fail.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yep.
69% of employees are more likely to stay with a company for 3 years if they've had great onboarding.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some members out there might be thinking, oh gosh, 3 years, that's nothing. But let's face it, that's about the average tenure of an individual at this point in time. And I think if you're getting 2 to 3 to 4 years from an employee of, great work, to me, that's a success.
Yes. And finally, organizations with a standard onboarding process experience 50% greater new hire productivity.
Okay. Yeah. Because again, you're investing in them. You're showing that you care about them and they're willing to go, the mile for you, essentially. They're willing to go the distance for you. So yeah, I like that.
Yes. And I think productivity also in some organizations can, again, turn into dollars as well. Like how quickly can we get somebody up and going, and then they're making money for our organization too.
Yeah, exactly. You could certainly pull the metric in of, per revenue per employee per day. That's certainly something that we could look at and see how that's impacting our organization. The sooner we get an individual productive, the sooner we're making money.
Yes. Great. So I want to discuss and kind of give to our listeners, what are the four, and we have kind of four key elements really that we discuss that are super key in including in your onboarding program. So let's jumpstart wherever you would like to start with one of the four key elements, and we can kind of chat through those and what that looks like.
Yeah, sure. So you want me to jump in?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So in the class, so Chelsea and I teach the onboarding class, and we talk about four key elements. And I just kind of, one jumped out at me. I kind of want to get it out of the way.
Go for it.
Because it's what we think of as orientation onboarding, but really it's such a small component, I think. So let's just talk about ensure compliance. So I've talked about ensuring compliance. That is absolutely an aspect of the orientation onboarding program. But to me, it's one of the smaller aspects. And when we are talking about ensuring compliance, we are talking about, making sure that the individual completes the I-9, that they are completing the W-4, that we are getting the information to payroll in an appropriate time to be able to get the individual paid, talking to them about benefits, maybe signing them up for benefits. One thing that I do want to mention here, when we talk about orientation onboarding, the timing of when we give information is key. And benefits is a key component of ensuring compliance. But don't think that you have to give benefit information on the first day of employment. Talk about that information overload that you hear from a lot of individuals. What ultimately ends up happening is if you're giving them, the history of the organization and introducing them to all these different employees, oh, and by the way, here's all the benefit information that you need to have to make a decision about what you want to enroll in, they're not going to remember. And especially if your benefits don't start until, first of the month following 30 days or first of the month following 60 days, they don't need that information on day one.
They really don't.
They're not going to remember. They're going to come back and ask you the same questions that they asked you on the first day. So it's a time commitment. So that's one of the things that I just wanted to add about benefits. Again, timing is key here. So, but we do want to ensure compliance with that. Handbook, we certainly do want to review the handbook with an individual, have them sign key policies. But I would also argue that, some of those things have to happen on the first day, but they don't all have to happen on the first day. And some of them could probably even happen within the first week. So that's the paperwork side of orientation onboarding, is this ensuring compliance. But let's get that done. We can check the list, check that box, and then we can move on to some of the other components of orientation onboarding, which I think warrant much more.
I think so too. And I also think, I would say to you the same. Don't forget what it feels like to walk into, be a new hire on the first day. There is a lot of anxiety to that, not sure what to expect, all of those pieces.
Did I make the right decision?
Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's kind of like being, like your first day of school, it's like your first day of work.
What am I going to wear? What am I?
Yes.
Yes.
And you'll always remember that piece. Uh-huh. And so I think that there's a lot going on the first day. And, if you want somebody to have great, maybe there's like safety, protocols. Maybe that's on day 2 when people are maybe a little bit more ready to digest that and make sure that they are fully aware of what needs to happen from like a safety perspective, or some of these other compliance policies that don't have to necessarily be on the first day.
Yep.
So absolutely. I agree with you.
Yep.
Great.
Okay.
So our next one.
Yeah.
Which one do you want to tackle?
So I think I want to go with building context. next.
Love it.
So I think that once we ensure compliance, then we can start to build context for an individual. And this is really where we start to talk about the history of the organization and the mission, the vision, the values of the organization, goals that the organization has, both short-term and long-term. So, I think that this really does help an individual understand what they're stepping into. We can talk about culture. Culture is huge, right? Individuals want to know right off the bat, what is the culture of this organization? What's acceptable and what's not acceptable? From a behavior perspective, from a communication perspective, all of those things we want to start talking to the employee about in the beginning. Now, again, this does not all happen on the first day. This is something that happens within the first week. This is even something that really leaks into kind of the first month of an individual who is new with you. But we really do want to start to build context, and there's lots of different ways that we can do that. We can, have one-on-one meetings with the manager, right, of the department, so they can give you a little bit more information. We can have one-on-one meetings with peers, for example. I think that they can really help kind of set context, especially culture, for the organization. I think it's really important, like I said, for the C-suite to be involved, and so maybe they can have, a quarterly meeting with new hires, for example, to discuss, here is the history of our organization, and here are our goals for the organization. And I think that really does help an individual. Plus, it just helps them get to know other individuals within the organization. What are some other things that you can think of, Chelsea, about helping to build context?
Yeah. I think that, of course, I love the idea of, so I think also sharing mission, vision, values, that is such a huge, important piece of a foundation of somebody coming into the work. Why do I do what I do? What is my purpose here to, what is our mission? What are the things that I'm working towards?
Yep.
So I think that piece is really big too. And I love what you said about the CEO. And I think that for those that are virtual too, and maybe larger organizations as well, where you have maybe employees spread out, maybe the CEO can even record a video and share a little bit more about the mission, vision, values of the organization too, and why, the history, the foundation of it. So yeah, I think I like that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think you bring up a really good point in that, we are in a different time right now, and there is a lot of organizations that are virtual. And I will say that most of the concepts that we're talking about here are very transferable, right? We still want to be doing the same things when it comes to orientation onboarding with individuals that come to a work site versus individuals that are virtual. We may tweak them a little bit, right? But very, very transferable. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yes, absolutely. And I still even remember when I started at Employers Council, I came from a large bank, my previous role, with lots, of course, if anyone's worked in banking or the financial world, there's so many titles.
Oh my gosh, yes.
There's so many titles. And just a cultural aspect, going from a large bank to, a smaller, obviously nonprofit organization like Employers Council. It was Mountain States Employers Council at the time.
Yep.
And I struggled even from an aspect culturally of how to write a proper email. And there were times at my previous role where if I was emailing somebody over a certain level of position, I would have to copy my boss on it. And there was actually some people in my previous organization also who, if you didn't put a colon after dear so-and-so, they wouldn't respond to your email. It was very, very formal.
Yeah.
Versus here at Employers Council, it kind of freaked me out for a while that, both our manager and her manager were in the same, how you have the Outlook groups.
Yes.
Were chunked up in our department group, because I was like, oh my gosh, Deb and Tamron are getting emails about food in the Colorado, New Mexico room. I cannot believe that. And for a while, I actually used to take them off of the email because I wasn't sure if they should be going to them. But, come to find out, obviously they would be, along with us getting food in the Colorado, New Mexico, just like everybody else, one of our rooms at our Denver building. So
yeah, I love that story, Chelsea. Thank you so much for sharing, because it does show the difference consequences in culture, and how it's important to understand kind of the norms, if you will, within an organization. And yeah, those are extremes, I will say, that's for sure. But the other thing that you triggered for me is that when it comes to culture, like I said, communication is big, right? When it comes to culture. So how do we communicate on a day-to-day basis? And even for us, we've got a lot of acronyms that we use internally within our organization. And I'm sure there's a lot of employers out there that have their own internal acronyms. So help set an individual up for success by doing like a little summary of here's the acronym, here's what it actually stands for. So individuals can actually participate in the conversation up front. Because otherwise they'll be lost. Like, what does that mean?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.